The 13th Amendment. How Lincoln fought to end slavery forever. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 1 of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. These 37 words changed America forever. Getting them into the Constitution was one of Abraham Lincoln's hardest political battles. On January 1, 1863, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in rebellious southern states. It was a celebrated event, but Lincoln knew it wasn't enough. The Emancipation Proclamation had serious problems. First, it only freed slaves in states that were fighting against the Union. Slavery remained legal in loyal border states like Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, and Delaware. The proclamation didn't apply everywhere in Confederate territory. It did not affect slavery in the following Union-controlled areas: Tennessee, the 68 Virginia counties that would become West Virginia, and parts of Louisiana. Second, Lincoln had signed it as a war measure using his Article II constitutional powers as commander-in-chief. This meant that when the war ended, courts might say the proclamation was no longer valid. People freed by the proclamation might be forced back into slavery. Lincoln had used the threat of freeing slaves as incentive for Confederate states to return to the Union. In September 1862, he issued an executive order that would free slaves on January 1, 1863, in any rebellious state that had not returned. No state took the offer, and the proclamation went into effect, but only in the 10 states still in rebellion. Lincoln understood that ending slavery permanently required change to the Constitution. Only a constitutional amendment would make abolition the law of the land forever. Lincoln's push for the 13th Amendment wasn't the first time American leaders had tried to limit slavery through federal law. Nearly 80 years earlier, the young nation had established an important precedent with the Northwest Ordinance. In 1784, Thomas Jefferson drafted the first ordinance to set up principles for governing territories and admission of new states. Jefferson included a provision that would have banned slavery in all new territories. This anti-slavery clause failed by one vote in Congress. In 1787, Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance, which governed the territory that would become Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota. Article 6 of this ordinance stated, "There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory, otherwise than in the punishment of crimes, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted." The Northwest Ordinance had the practical effect of establishing the Ohio River as the geographic divide between slave states and free states, from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River. Lincoln and other Republican leaders knew the federal government had banned slavery in territories, but to do so in the states required a constitutional amendment. The Northwest Ordinance prohibition of slavery and involuntary servitude was adapted to become the 13th Amendment in 1865. To amend the Constitution, Lincoln needed a 2/3 vote in both the House and Senate. Then 3/4 of all states had to approve it. The prospects were dim. The Senate approved the proposed 13th Amendment in April 1864. However, when the House voted on June 15, 1864, the amendment failed. This was a major setback. A crucial Lincoln ally was Pennsylvania Representative Thaddeus Stevens. Stevens was known for his fiery speeches against slavery and mastery of congressional tactics. When the June 1864 vote failed, Stevens advised Lincoln to try again after the presidential election. Lincoln's big victory in the 1864 presidential election changed the political situation. He defeated Democrat George McClellan, who had promised to negotiate a peace without the abolition of slavery. Lincoln's win showed that voters supported turning the war into a fight for freedom. Lincoln's party platform had endorsed abolition by constitutional amendment, giving him a mandate. Lincoln understood practical politics. As he lobbied House members for yes votes on the amendment, he did not confine his arguments to the immorality of slavery. He tailored his argument for his audience. To some border state Republicans, he said ending slavery would stop the South from using slave labor to rebuild their army after the war. To Democrats who wanted the war over, he argued that permanent abolition would discourage Confederate soldiers and encourage surrender. Lincoln employed presidential power to reward supporters and pressure opponents. He offered government jobs, military contracts, and political appointments to congressmen who would vote his way. Timing was crucial. The Senate's April 1864 approval remained valid, but only if the House approved before new members were sworn in on March 4, 1865. If not approved by then, the entire process would have to start over. As the critical vote approached in January 1865, Lincoln turned the White House into a lobbying headquarters. To New York Democrat Moses Odell, he promised federal appointments in New York. To Missouri Congressman James Rollins, he explained the end of slavery would help border state economies by eliminating competition from slave labor. Everyone in Lincoln's administration helped. Secretary of State William Seward negotiated with congressmen from his sickbed after a carriage accident. Mary Lincoln hosted parties designed to influence congressional wives. Lincoln and his team used every executive power at their disposal to obtain votes. Lincoln later called this the most important work of my administration. Some historians suggest that direct bribery of House members may have taken place. On January 31, 1865, the House chamber was packed. Speaker Schuyler Colfax called for the final vote. The atmosphere was tense and the outcome uncertain. When the clerk announced the result, 119 votes for the amendment, 56 against, the chamber exploded in celebration. Republican congressmen cried openly while people in the galleries cheered. When Lincoln got word at the White House, he simply said, "It is done." Privately, he told his secretary that this moment fulfilled his deepest beliefs about human equality and what the Constitution really meant. Congressman Thaddeus Stevens later reflected on the victory, reportedly saying, "The greatest measure of the 19th century was passed by corruption, aided and abetted by the purest man in America." An accurate telling of the 13th Amendment story is the 2012 movie Lincoln. Actor Daniel Day-Lewis was nominated for an Academy Award for his portrayal of the 16th president. Tommy Lee Jones portrayed Thaddeus Stevens. Passing Congress was only half the battle. Pursuant to the Constitution's Article 5, the amendment still needed approval from 3/4 of the states. Lincoln, assassinated on April 15, 1865, would not live to see the amendment ratified. On December 6, 1865, Georgia became the 27th state of the then 36 states to ratify the 13th Amendment. Secretary Seward certified on December 18, 1865, that the 13th Amendment had become part of the Constitution 8 months after Lincoln's death. This was not only the end of slavery. It was a fundamental change in how the federal government could use power to protect human rights and regulate the conduct of the states. The amendment's second section gave Congress power to enforce the new law through appropriate legislation. Congress used its enforcement power to define involuntary servitude broadly, with congressional definitions beyond traditional slavery to include obtaining labor through threatening or using physical force, using legal coercion, physical restraint or threats, blackmail, causing or threatening financial harm. Lincoln's role was crucial. His moral leadership and political skill built coalitions across party lines. He created a model for how to achieve major change in the American Republic. Lincoln's push for a constitutional amendment had been prescient. After Lincoln's death, President Andrew Johnson tried to reverse many of Lincoln's policies. Southern states passed black codes trying to recreate slavery under a different name. The 13th Amendment provided the legal foundation to oppose these efforts. The 13th Amendment was a significant step in legally erasing the largest contradiction between the promise of America's founding and the reality of slavery. The 13th Amendment completed what Jefferson had started in 1784. The language that Jefferson and others had used to ban slavery in the Northwest Territory became the law for the entire United States in 1865. As Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner observed, the amendment was nothing less than the fulfillment of a promise first expressed at the founding. Those 37 words represented the end of decades of struggle and the beginning of a new chapter in the American experiment. Please like and share this video and subscribe to Constitutional Soundbites and join the effort to combat constitutional illiteracy.